Welcome to Ohio Lodge of Research Connections. In this episode, our master, Right Worshipful Brother Chad Kopenski, sits down with Most Worshipful Brother Bill Carter. And although it's sometimes difficult to figure out who is interviewing whom, they discuss many things related to Most Worshipful Brother Carter's introduction into Masonry, as well as their perspectives on education, research, and the relationship to Freemasonry.
Yay, we're recording. I'm probably gonna have to call you most throughout this entire thing, right?
I don't. You know what? I think it would be easier on everybody's ears if we just do Bill and Chad.
You think?
I think that might be good. I don't know.
I know I can do that. That's gonna be really hard for you. Masonry was not in your family, is that correct? It wasn't.
Well, no, it was, but there was a gap.
Okay.
So it certainly was there in what we might call the heyday. And I did have a great grandfather who was a part of the fraternity. I had a grandfather who was a part of the fraternity. And even my mother was part of one of the youth organizations, but it stopped there. And so there was no such thing as growing up in DeMolay or anything. That benefit wasn't something that came to me. And my belief is that's a huge benefit. But that was one that didn't come my way. So really what happened, just to kind of give the story in very brief form, was really a personal project that I was doing. I was, fairly newly married to my wife and knew that we wanted to have a family someday. And I had, aging grandparents. And I thought it would be really great if my daughter could hear their voices. So
Yes.
we kind of had an agreement that we would interview. And this is back in the days of, cellophane running between reels, right? We're recording the tapes. But to make, again, the story short, in my conversations with my grandfather, the subject of Masonry came up. And that was a moment where a transformation took place right in front of my eyes. I've known this man, for almost my entire life, as far as my awareness of this man. And to see such a dramatic change come over his face, the tears appear in his eyes. The immediate question for me was, why? Why is this impacting him so much? My wife and I had long said, even when we were dating, that she and I were enough for each other. We really didn't need other people. And yet here's my grandfather, and I still have the words, right? I made the recording. Suddenly transforming. That was the piece that tipped me off. Now, I also explained during my rollouts that I got delayed for about a decade because, being in technology, early internet, I happened to pull up an anti-Masonic site, and it delayed me for 10 years because, quite frankly, and I'm going to point a little bit of a finger, shake a little finger here, Masonry had not yet figured out that an online presence was going to be a thing. Thank goodness for the Grand Lodge of Ohio that Mike Watson said, we should reserve this domain thing because this web thing might be big. So all of a sudden you type freemason.com and here's the Grand Lodge of Ohio. But the point is that was that initial captured emotion. That very real moment was literally something that pushed a button in me and told me, and this is difficult for many men to come to, Bill, you might be wrong. There might be something here for you to learn. And so that was really kind of how it kicked off for me.
Talking about just like formal education. Were your parents college graduates?
No, neither one of my parents are college graduates. No.
And did you go to college right after high school?
I did. So high school, quite frankly, I found it a little bit easy. Got to do National Honor Society and all that. Got to college, got to Ohio State University, and in my very first quarter, so I came in honors college. My very first quarter, I signed up for calculus and all the courses that the honors college recommended. And Chad, I got my first D.
Oh, well, we never talked about that.
No, and that for me that was disastrous. And looking at it in hindsight now, it's abundantly clear. And they always say the rear view mirror is always clearer than the windshield. Looking back at it in hindsight, it really had nothing to do with the educational material. Had nothing to do with the way the teachers were. It had to do with the fact that I was not used to that freedom. I just wasn't used to it. And so I was incredibly distracted, and not giving, again, because the rails were gone now, I wasn't giving the attention that I should get. I know I could have done better. Just wasn't doing it.
I never learned how to study in high school because everything always came easy.
Bingo.
And I didn't learn how to struggle. I didn't learn how to like get knocked down, figure out what my resources are, and get back up.
Right.
And so that my mother likes to bring it up every once in a while that I failed computer science 3 times in college. And then my first real major job outside of college was working for an IT firm as a, computer programmer. Like, thanks, Mom.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. But your mom, I suspect probably, and certainly you can tell me if this is accurate or not, but I really consider myself fortunate with my parents in that they, in a way, protected me from having to know what it means to struggle. Call it privilege. That certainly would be valid. Now, it's not to say that we had everything. I know after the fact that we went through times that were tight, but they always prevented me from sensing that. So my opinion was, and still is to this day, that I had a wonderful childhood.
It was interesting about struggling was that I remember my father, I was never that great with money. And so like year 2 or 3, I called him, I'd gotten out of, I called him like, Dad, I'm out of money. I need this and this and this. And he goes, wow, Chad, that's just, what's your plan? I remember thinking, I have to have a plan.
You're right.
And God bless him. And again, looking back as a teacher and as a dad now, my dad sat there and started asking me questions and saying, well, have you thought about this? And have you thought about this? I'm like, well, yeah. And then when I got done, I had come up with a plan.
Right.
Oh, so it wasn't him telling me what to do. It was him showing me, it was him guiding me through that process.
Right.
As a dad or as a mentor. Was education of value in your household? It was like with you and your brother and everybody else, they're like, yep, you're going there or no?
Yeah, I would say it was there was kind of a split value.
Okay.
You asked the question earlier about, did your parents have college degrees? I think that there was a strong encouragement for reading. I can always remember it was a 6 or 7 volume encyclopedia set that my mother had purchased at a garage sale again, that was called The Land and Its Peoples, and it was all about different cultures. Do you know this series?
I read the same thing.
It's a great series. I don't know if it was like a Reader's Digest or like a Time Life or something like that. But what I remember fascinated me was as it would go over each of the different cultures, it would show their writing, right? The script that they actually used to write. And as a child, that was fascinating to me. Why are their letters so different? So from that perspective, it was a massive curiosity that was developed in me. And, in fact, I can remember, this is kind of silly, but it still sticks out in my mind. I had looked up the section on Mexico, and it was telling you how to say hello. And I tried to sound it out. And I remember thinking the way you say hello in Spanish was Buenos dias, right? Because I couldn't figure it out, but it was fascinating to me. So there was that aspect, Chad, but there was also the aspect, and this is not to rip anything down, but there was also the aspect of the importance of sport, the importance of competition and athleticism. And for whatever reason, that didn't quite speak to me. It just didn't. I was more interested in the reading as I got older. Music became really big for me, and I can remember having synthesizers, right? The little inexpensive ones you would get like out of the Sears catalog.
The Casio ones with
it was a Casio CZ230S. Yes, absolutely. And I was more interested in programming the synthesizer and the sequencer than actually learning how to play the piano. So I could tell that there was something in me, and maybe nowadays somebody might say, your addiction to patterns and I used to trace lines with my finger. Nowadays, people might say, oh, maybe he's a little bit on the spectrum. Whatever that means, right? Whatever that means. But that was kind of where my focus was. And in fact, I'll never forget, I was working and had saved some money, and I bought another little miniature synthesizer from one of the little department stores. And my father got very mad at me. He said, "What are you going to do? You going to drive to a job on your synthesizer, right? Shouldn't you be saving that for a car?" So it was very much I was very thirsty for these things, but athleticism and sports and competition, it almost was a letdown. So like you, I was interested in music. I was interested in, you know, singing, really, really big into choir, really, really big when show choir became a thing, the dancing and the singing. I know a lot of my Masonic brothers would be horrified to think of me dancing, but I used to really do it and I used to really love it.
Wow, we're getting off so many topics here, but that's okay.
Mhm.
There is, I think, a danger, especially, and we'll go back to Masonic education, in that sometimes there's a lot of an echo chamber,
Yes,
and all
that's
of
right.
uh, in all of education in general.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
I think that's kind of talking about earlier, is that you don't want to be the guy who just regurgitates the
right,
same thing everywhere you go.
right. Well, let's talk about trajectory, because ultimately, I think we need to consider both the teaching and the learning experience based upon the place that the audience and the instructor finds themselves. So the truth of the matter is, we have men that approach Freemasonry for a variety of reasons. We always talk about this,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And we say that, we may say that Freemasonry is a big tent, and that there's something in here for everybody.
Yeah.
And I'm yeah, you kind of make it a motion of weighing it in both hands. That I feel the same way, because the truth of the matter is, this could just be a matter of where you are on the arc. I will tell you that, in my youth, very, very full of imagination and wonder, right? Things, and for a long time in my life. But life has this weird way, and particularly if you're on your own, and for some people that happens very early, which can be very difficult, for them, because they may not be equipped with the kinds of tools that they need to cope with what frankly can be very harsh reality. But at some point, depending on where you are on the arc, you will come to that. And the funny thing about daily living is, it can have a way of really making a cynic out of you,
Yeah.
especially
Absolutely.
knowing that people are people, and they will look for advantages and things to this effect. I mean, it's sort of the way of the world. I can remember at one point, in fact, I can remember the phase in my life very clearly, where I started looking at these things and saying, this is BS, right? This is nonsense. All you care about is money. All you care about, right? And it's so funny to look back on that now, because I think, okay, yeah, that was very nice. That was very idealistic, and it made you very cynical. But the bottom line is, there are ways to accomplish things, and sometimes you need to utilize that system in order to gain it. So I will tell you, this is what I'm getting to, that there was this very imaginative, full of wonder person that at some point in his life, and it was about that university time, when suddenly he became very cynical. He became very convinced, yeah, same for you, became very convinced that this is all nonsense. It's a dog eat dog world. Um, and your imagination begins to shut down. Now, some might say that it's good that your imagination shuts down, because there are things you need to do. I would very much disagree with that, because I think that open sense of wonder is what enables you to learn from other people. You have
Agreed.
to have it. And so it took time for it to get back. And my argument would be that Freemasonry literally was that key that reopened that lock and said, pal, you don't know anything, right? And it's time to redevelop that sense of wonder, to remove all those social barriers that have been put on you. It's time to start learning fresh.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, um, in my youth, in my teens, my faith was enough. And then you get to college and you get hit a couple times, and you believe the world works a certain way. And part of me almost thinks that, if that idea of, manifestation, you have to wonder if how much of the world being that way is your attitude and you believing that it works that way.
Absolutely.
The humility that came with my father dying and also moving from Wisconsin to Ohio, all of a sudden being like having what I thought was nothing.
Yeah.
And in a silly sort of sense, part of that humility was recognizing that there are other viewpoints than mine, that as smart as I think I am, I don't know everything. And in fact, as smart as I am, man, the world is so much cooler without certainty. That, because what I know today could very easily change based off of what I learn in the next 10 minutes and what I think tomorrow. So, and I think Freemasonry does help that, because you're right. There's people who I would never have ever talked to or met, but all of a sudden, whatever social barriers are up are gone. And I'm in a place where I'm ready to listen.
Right.
So,
it's a great point. Part of this, and again, I think this is something that Freemason really helps with, and I'll explain why. Part of this is there's almost a little bit of comfort. In fact, you might say a lot of bit of comfort when the world can be chunked down into us and them, good and evil, black and white. That can be a comfortable place. It requires much less thinking. And I say that advisedly, right? Because that may sound offensive to some people to say, no, look, I know the truth, and this is the truth, and anything outside of that is wrong. That is a nice place to live. It is a nice place to live. It can still make you cynical, because pretty soon you'll say this world is going to, in a handbasket and so forth. And I'm the only one that seems to get this. But the interesting thing about Freemasonry, and where I think Freemasonry begins to gnaw away at that comfortable room, is that Freemasonry says you're going to be with brothers that come from different social experiences, religious experiences, work experiences with family, and they're your brothers. You have obligated yourself to be with your brothers. So at one point, you almost arrive at this place where you have to make a decision that says, okay, am I going to do this, or am I going to maintain where I am? And I'm just looking for some drinking buddies? Because I'll tell you, the truth of the matter is, if that's the mindset coming into this fraternity, you're going to find yourself in a very small place, by limiting the amount of listening that you're willing to do.
I'd agree with that. I also, there's about 4 different ways to respond to that. But one of the things that I think is interesting is, what Freemasonry does is provide that, for lack of a better words, that safe space, right?
Right.
If I am a rabid Rastafarian, right, and there's somebody in Lodge who is a rabid, I don't know, anti-Rastafarian, whatever that would be. We can start with it from a place of respect. Say, listen, brother, you know what? I hear what you're saying. Can you help me see what you're seeing? Which is frightening and to do. But because you don't know how they're going to respond, and you don't want to cause disharmony in the lodge.
Right.
But those opportunities are there. If you take advantage of them to listen.
Yeah.
Because I think we're getting to what I think was probably one of the key questions I wanted to ask you, which is one of the things you and I have always talked about is that Freemasonry is education. Like you can't separate the two.
Right.
But the other thing is people tend to put values on that, right? That this counts as education. This
Right.
this is quality education. That's for the Shriners or whoever. Right. So I mean, I guess what qualifies? What if we're a big tent, you and I both agree, like there's a line somewhere. I don't know that line. Well, I guess where for you is that line? Whereas I know that's a hard question, isn't it?
No, well, it's not so much difficult as it is vast in its scope. What actually qualifies as Masonic education? Is it cracking out the Masonic Service Association's bulletin and reading for 5 minutes? Okay. Sure, you may find something there that's a little bit of a nugget. Interestingly, the educational process, I think this is a built-in human need. The educational process requires a sounding board. It requires humankind to come together and to begin to debate and discuss. Otherwise, and this is some wisdom that actually came out of Western Europe long time ago, that said that the moment you write something down, you crystallize it. And that sounds great, right? Because crystals are pretty. But what they meant by that is the moment you write it down and it crystallizes, it becomes brittle. Meaning you lose nuance, you lose the ability to find those areas where maybe this doesn't apply as a blanket. Masonic education, what qualifies as Masonic education, and I'll just throw this definition out and be absurdly overgeneral about it, are those things that are transmitted from one brother to another that kick off the process of transformation. That is Masonic education. Have you kicked off the process of transformation? If you have, and the individual is in that right place along the arc where they're ready to consider opinions that they might not currently hold. Somebody once said, hold on tightly, but also let go loosely, to the ideas that you hold. If you're in that right place, Masonic education triggers that evaluative process, or that reevaluative process, where you begin to look at it again and your mind begins yet another transformation. Maybe something small. Maybe that transformation is simply deeper confirmation of what you already believe. But maybe that transformation is taking an idea, examining it, and realizing that this was an idea that was forced into you by society or identity or whatever the case may be, and beginning to turn that over in a different light and say, okay, is this really the way that it is, or is there something more subtle and more nuanced? Now, I know Ohio has kind of defined Masonic education. I know you've done some work on this, so fire that out for everybody, right? Because I'm pretty sure you had a little bit of a hand in that. So I'd love to hear.
I was not chairman. It was Charlie Murphy. And yes, there is an official definition of of education in Ohio. And I will say probably that I came up with it because it's remarkably vague, but there's elements of what you just said in there. And it's almost as if you had a hand in inspiring that thing. So in Ohio, Masonic education is any activity properly framed that teaches brethren our values and how to incorporate them into their lives with the proper with the most important two words in that sentence being properly framed. Yes. That in the right hands, this box of Cheez-Its is an absolutely phenomenal Masonic educational piece. Offhand, I'm sure I can think about something in terms of, creating the right cracker at the right time for the right person.
Sure.
In the wrong hands, it's nothing. The same thing. You can have the most perfectly written, created thing, but if it's not in the proper frame, if it's not in the right context, if it's not intended towards the brethren, then it's just noisy brass. So,
Boy, yeah, and you know, you can feel that if you have spent any time trying to educate an audience, when you misfire and you don't meet your audience in the arc where they are, you know it right away. So you're right. That proper framing is everything. It's absolutely everything, because pretty soon the audience is just going, what is this person talking about? Right? I have no
yeah,
idea what this is. And it kills it.
we're talking about like the ideal of Masonic education.
Mhm, mhm,
So, just for a second, and we'll go back to this, and we'll come back to the good stuff.
mhm.
Then, what's the danger of bad Masonic education? Whatever bad Masonic education is.
There was a quote by a brother Mason that said that you should always be willing to listen to the man who says that he's seeking the truth, but you should always be wary of listening to the man who says that he's the only one that's found it. Um, that to me is pretty profound, and the key is be wary, right? Maybe they have, but be careful, because you get into that okay, we don't need to be resilient anymore, we've got it, and suddenly that's when you start missing things, right? You get that fixation, and you begin to miss things, and so, you know, bad education, one could argue, is, again, it's not engaging, it doesn't foster that resiliency, and it leads to kind of a polarity in thinking of us versus them, or good, this is good, that's necessarily bad. um, I think that's really where it is. I do think it all starts with engagement, though. First, Chad, first and foremost, education has to engage. If you can't pass that hurdle, you're done. You're done.
How do we get our brethren to start reading and to start thinking and to start asking? Like, how do we get them to get up off their laurels and engage?
So I have to talk about something uncomfortable here, right? Because there is a contrary line of thinking
Okay.
that says that as you progress through your Masonic journey, when you know you're moving from entered apprentice to fellow craft to master mason, and we'll keep it there, that when you reach that level of a master mason, you are you have hit a level of learning, like a doctor, like a physician, and that you would never call a physician a student. Now, I know that may sound a little bit, that's a tough one to unpack, right? Because yes, they're a physician, they're a doctor. They're not a student anymore. They're a doctor. They have a philosophy degree, right? Uh, they're not a student anymore. And that anybody that would say that that doctor says, no, no, I'm still very much a student, I learn all the time, that is a sign of an immature individual. That they which is remarkable, because some of, and I'm trying purposely not to say a name, but this particular individual that espoused that really sparked off a storm online by insisting that that was the case. That those men who say, you know, I'm a master mason, but you know, I still have things to learn. You know, I'm still an entered apprentice. I still have things I need to learn. There's a reason we walk the way we do in lodge. It's to get that model in our head. And this individual, who many people see as kind of an authority on Masonic education, says that's a very immature way to approach things. Quite honestly, and just to put a stake in the ground, I violently disagree with that, um, because that is resting on our laurels.
I get we I firmly agree with you that just being a master mason is, in my words, it's not enough. Like, and I've never been the person to sort of be okay with enough, you
Mm.
know, and I get those that is there, but you're right. Like, our ritual is so much more interesting than people know, and our
Oh my
history. Oh my
goodness,
God.
yes.
If you just
Oh
start,
yes.
I am in our proceedings all the time, and you see just the weirdest and most wonderful stuff that makes you think even more. And
Oh, yeah.
I don't, one of the things we've been talking about with the Lodge of Research this year is how do we get them to why?
Mm,
You know, how do
mm,
we get them to, you know, We have so many guys who go, oh, huh, that's cool. But they
Right.
never get to why, or they never get to the next step, which is asking, researching,
Yeah.
looking forward. And I don't know how we, I don't know how we inspire and foster curiosity.
When we think about it from the educator's perspective, we've already talked about the one who's being educated, right? How do you begin to open them up? How do you begin to change that consumer mentality into a contributor mentality? But when it comes to the educator, the one who is trying to transmit that transformative information, what are the methods that they actually use? What are the on-ramps? So you and I talk about this all the time. Is it a book? Is it a presentation? Do you follow podcasts? What do you do? How do you start this process?
Oh, but there's two ways to answer your question. One is, if you consider yourself a Masonic educator, how do you become educated? The other part of that is, if you consider yourself a Masonic educator, how do you pass that along to others?
Let's go how you self-educate first, because we're talking in the context of Lodge of Research. And you mentioned this just a second ago, that some brothers will pick up the pamphlet and go, huh, cool, and throw it away. So what is the value of research? We talk about research and regurgitate as if it's a naughty thing. Research is necessary. In fact, I'm going to get esoteric on you for a second here, Chad. When we talk about rediscovering that which was lost, you have to research in order to do that. So let's talk from
You
that
forget that
perspective first.
I'm the guy who's been falling ass backwards into research on my buddy Shearer for the last like 4 years. Like everything,
100%.
like you've been there with me and heard me just kind of stumble into
Sure.
stupid stuff.
Sure.
The research is about asking the question why, and then taking the step forward to find out.
Hmm.
But I think there's something also inherent in your question that we need to unpack, which is education can't happen in a vacuum, right?
Mhm.
If I sit here and I read all 14 volumes of Little Masonic Library,
Mhm.
am I educated?
Informed,
It's
perhaps. Yeah, but
informed,
Hmm.
but there's more to it. There has to be, it, it can't happen in an ivory tower.
Yeah.
Either becoming educated yourself
Mhm.
or educating others. And I think that's a mistake that I think happens in many lodges of research, is that you end up acting alone. You end up sitting there in front of your computer, writing things, reading things, researching things,
Sure.
and it's insular. And
That's right.
it
That's
can't
right.
be. So, I do you, my friend, I do consider, a beacon of light, somebody who is educated, and really you're somebody who I could just sit and listen talk for hours, as
No, thank you.
So how do we get guys to get where you are, or where we are? Where do they start? If they're sitting there in a lodge and they're going, God, Chad and Bill, they sound like they have an idea. Um, how do we get them to find their own voice? How do we get them to start that journey? And that
Mm.
actually goes back to the other part of your question, which was, as an educator, how do we, instead of how do we become educated, how do we educate others? So
Yeah. Yeah.
how do we get guys to start?
Well, we've got a big hurdle that we have to leap. And my argument, and again, this is my own thinking, is that we're in a situation of a bit of an identity crisis in the fraternity. Um, we have a difficult time defining who we are. And you can tell the indicators are really, really clear, because when people ask, what is this, right? And it's perhaps we can call it remarkable, or we could say it's expected. Uh, People don't know who we are. They have no idea what Freemasonry is. And when a Freemason is asked, a lot of times they have to resort to rote repetition of something that they've heard. Well, we make good men better. Well, how? How do you do that? Well, I don't know. We've got these rituals and we've got these things. Or, I joked about this at my rollouts. Excuse my cough. Where you get some of these brighter guys and I say brighter, right, advisedly, that say, well, we're a peculiar system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Listen, you lost your audience right there, right?
Second word. So you said peculiar, they were gone.
Right. They were like done. Peculiar, right? They don't understand that is a nuanced word, meaning something that's set apart. It's particular. It's different from the norm. So my thought on this is that we have got to invest some time in reclaiming our identity. We have to understand, it's whence came you, and what are you here to do, right? So really, my thinking and what really has been my focus, and working with the education committee, by the way, love doing that. We've got such intelligent, compassionate individuals on that committee. But I'd be less than truthful if I said that I put down a vision for the education initiatives for this year, and they grabbed it and took off running. And next thing I know, a beautiful package showed up on my doorstep with a completed educational program. It didn't happen that way. There had to be an exchange between myself, the education committee. There had to be work that had to be evaluated and tweaked and changed and so forth. But the ultimate goal in this was, how do we provide tools that enable a lodge to understand not only the Masonic identity, but their particular subculture, their local culture, that made them visible and relevant. There you go. I got it out there, right? But
I haven't said that in years, but
right,
I say it all the time. So.
Well, we used to talk about that a lot.
All the time.
But very, very important that first step happens. Once we have established that sense of culture, then we can begin that strategic approach to how do we begin to educate and stretch and grow and become even more relevant. A lot of times I got to put the hat back on for a second here, because a lot of times people will ask, what do you hope to leave behind as our duly elected Grand Master? And my mind doesn't really work like that. It in my mind, it's not about what can I tattoo on the walls of the fraternity. My deepest desire for the fraternity is the resurgence of this flame that I know that at one time was burning so brightly that we saw a very significant desire that people had to be a part of it and to remain a part of it. That was so important. And I think that's still in us. I think it is.